Greetings, adventurers. I am Whisper. Welcome back to the library. With the start of 2025, we have seen the rise of a new challenge, reading 25 books in 2025. For some people, this is a walk in the park. Those who can read 80 or more books in a year probably look at this and laugh. But for others of us, 25 is a huge number to try and achieve. One of my big goals this year was already to double the amount of books I'd read last year, which would take me to 24. So, what's one more book? As of writing this, I am 3 books deep. A little challenge never hurt anybody. Today, I thought it'd be fun to go over the books I have on my TBR list this year from my 25 and 2025. Part of my books are part of the previous book challenge. I found the template on Pinterest and thought it would be fun to do while also keeping me from being indecisive about my next read. This is what my chart looks like so far. As you can see, my very first read of the challenge did not go well, but it didn't deter me from pushing through. The first 15 books on my 25 and 2025 fill in this challenge. From there, I picked a handful of books that have been on my TBR for ages. I found this template for 25 and 25 on Pinterest and filled it in with all the books on my list. The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling is the book I chose to start my previous book challenge. I didn't have any requirements for this other than being a launching off point. I've owned it since its release in 2021. It sits at 3.2 stars and over 20,000 ratings on Goodreads. It's filed under horror, gothic, historical fiction, paranormal, and mystery. I think the horror tag is going a bit far. It's gothic for sure, dealing with magic and the occult, but it really misses the horror mark for me. The novel follows the life of Jane Shoringfield as she enters a marriage of convenience to Dr. Augustine Lawrence. But when she breaks her promise of never going to his family manor, things go downhill fast, and Jane finds herself thrust into a world that is at odds with her mathematical brain. She discovers dark secrets about Augustine's past and that sometimes the dead don't stay dead. This was actually my first DNF of the year. I made a whole post about it over on my blog. I will drop the link down below. I was disappointed that I waited 4 years to read this book and was worried that it was an ill omen about the rest of my reading challenge. I've only purposefully DNF'd one other novel and one novella before. I've always felt like I had to finish the book just for the sake of completing it. However, I'm glad I did DNF it. It gave me more room to read other books. It actually gave me space to read another book and discover a new favorite. You may notice not only does Voice Like a Hyacinth not follow the next rules of the challenge, I don't even have it on my 25 and 2025. That's because this was an accidental discovery. I was looking up books that were releasing this year and saw it. The synopsis was enough to have me looking at the pre-order price on Amazon. What I discovered is that you get 2 pre-order Kindle books a month that are included with the subscription, so I decided to download it. And I'm so glad that I did. It's my first 5-star read of the year, which I also made a post about over on my blog. As an LGBTQ plus horror thriller, Voice Like a Hyacinth sits at 3.7 stars and 712 ratings on Goodreads. This one actually does belong under the horror tag. This is one of the only books to ever give me goosebumps. It's about 5 women in their last year of art school, so I'd consider this to be a dark academia novel. All of them want the prestigious solo spot at the end of the year gallery exhibition. It can make or break their art careers. But when they do a ritual to get back at a handsy professor and boost their creativity, they have to deal with the gory consequences. I absolutely loved this. The prose were beautiful. The relationship between the girls reminded me of my own friends. As an artist myself, I also just appreciate the general setting of an art college. It was suspenseful and creepy as you start to wonder how reliable the narrator truly is. Already one of my favorite reads of the year. I wanted to start it all over again as soon as it ended, but if I did, I wouldn't have time to read the other things on my list. An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson was the second book in my previous book challenge. I'm ignoring articles and just going with the rest of the title. The requirement for this was to read a book that starts with the last letter in the title of the previous book, which is E. It was released last year and currently sits at 3.5 stars and over 16,000 ratings on Goodreads. It's another LGBTQ plus horror dark academia novel. I did not I did not mean to read two at the same time, so imagine my surprise when I discovered their similar themes. Overall, An Education in Malice wasn't a bad book. I gave it 3.5 stars myself. I'm going to do a full review of it over on my blog soon, but it definitely wasn't what I was expecting it to be, and saying that it's horror enemies to lover would be pushing it. The book follows Laura as she starts at college in New England. She ends up in a poetry class that's exclusively for seniors, but she was allowed special permissions in. There she meets Camilla, who is stated to be her rival, but never really shown to be her rival, if that makes sense. Their professor, de La Fontaine, has an obsession with Camilla, and eventually pulls Laura into their private meetings. De La Fontaine introduces the girls to her dark world of supernatural beings, and a string of murders follows. Honestly, An Education in Malice was missing the malice for me. Carmilla and Laura don't really feel like rivals. It feels more like insta-love and then just being generally annoyed by each other's presence until they finally admit they like each other. They're sweet to each other, but I feel like Camilla's personality changes a lot over the course of the book, and not in a character development kind of way. She bounces back and forth between being snobby to being an overall whiny brat, even though she is a full-grown adult in her early 20s. The book does the forbidden relationship between professor and student well. It really makes you feel like this is a secret to be kept. I liked Laura and how she had this darkness inside of her. It made her feel like a real lesbian in the 1960s who had to conceal who she was. Overall, however, it loses points to me for one cardinal sin. It is a first-person dual point of view. I cannot stand this new obsession with every book being dual point of view. Not only when it's between the main character and the love interest. Why do I want to read 300 pages of just hearing them alternately pine for each other? Just show me their relationship actually blooming. But when it's also first person, I just can't stand it. I did not need Camilla's point of view. I do not think that it helped the story, and I think it would have been perfectly fine if it had been purely Laura's point of view. Despite the issues I had with the book, I would recommend giving it a read if you're looking for a one-off queer gothic romance. Schrader's Chord by Scott Lee was published September of 2023 as his debut novel, but it definitely doesn't feel like a debut novel. It was rather refreshing. This is my third book for the previous book challenge, an author with the same first letter as the author in the previous book. Last I checked, Scott and ST start with the same letter. I bought this book on a whim during my bachelorette trip to the beach. I kept looking at it and finally just decided to buy it. I've been staring at it on my shelf for months, and I'm so glad I decided to add it to the challenge. It is 4 stars and 2,000 ratings on Goodreads. It's a paranormal horror thriller. I really enjoyed this one. It was everything I wanted out of a book about haunted records. It surprised me how much I'm enjoying horror books about music. Then again, I was in band and choir all through school, so music's just kind of ingrained in me. Schrader's Chord is about Charlie Remick following the supposed suicide of his father. He's left 4 records, known as Schrader's Chord, which is said to open a pathway to the land of the dead when played. Thinking it's a joke, the records get played, obviously. Now Charlie has to unravel the record's mystery in order to keep from being the chord's next victim. When I tell you this book gave me chills, I could not put it down. I gave it 4.5 stars myself. This book is one that does multiple points of view well. Firstly, it's third person, which I feel is much more beneficial when writing from more than one point of view. Secondly, it feels like a seamless transition between characters, like when you watch a movie or TV show and you follow one person and then another. I cannot recommend this book enough. How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix is one I've had my eye on since it came out. Grady Hendrix is my favorite author right now and is usually an auto buy for me. It's been sitting on my shelf since last March, and I was excited to be able to add it to my list. I'm currently about 120 pages in, and while I'm excited to read more, I could also strangle the main character's brother. And he's the real thing that's been keeping me from devouring this book, but I know that it's good writing to be this angry at a fictional character. It currently sits at 3.6 stars and has 133,000 reviews on Goodreads. This is the fourth novel in the challenge, and it was my easiest pick, a book in the same genre as the previous book. Both Schrader's Court and How to Sell a Haunted House are horror novels. I'm just hoping it gives me the same chills, which it's about haunted dolls and puppets, so I'm sure the chills will come. In How to Sell a Haunted House, we follow Louise Joyner. When she finds out her parents have died, she dreads going home. She doesn't want to leave her daughter with her ex to fly to Charleston. She doesn't want to deal with her family home, stuffed to the rafters with remnants of her father's academic career and her mother's lifelong obsession with puppets and dolls. She doesn't want to learn how to live without the two people who knew and loved her best in the world. Most of all, she doesn't want to deal with her brother Mark, who never left their hometown, gets fired from one job after another, and resents her success. Unfortunately, she'll need his help to get the house ready for sale, because it'll take more than some new paint on the walls and clearing out a lifetime of memories to get this place on the market. But some houses don't want to be sold, and their home has other plans for both of them. Like I said, I'm not even halfway through reading this because Mark is... Ooh... If I could strangle someone, if I could strangle a fictional character, oh, it would be him. So far, it's good, though. Other than him, I'm enjoying the book thoroughly. Episode 13 drew me in by just the premise of being about a ghost show. I just think that is like a cool idea to write a book about. I love stories about haunted houses and ghost hunters who finally find their evidence. It currently sits at 3.5 stars and 22,000 reviews on Goodreads. I honestly didn't think it was that popular. This sits in the 5th slot at the challenge, a book published the same year as the previous book. Both episode 13 and How to Sell a Haunted House released in 2023. In episode 13, Fade to Black is the newest ghost hunting reality TV show. Led by husband and wife team Matt and Claire Kirkland, it delivers weekly hauntings investigated by a dedicated team of ghost hunting experts. Episode 13 takes them to every ghost hunter's holy grail, the Paranormal Research Foundation. This brooding, derelict mansion holds secrets and clues about bizarre experiments that took place there in the 1970s. It's also famously haunted, and the team hopes their scientific techniques and high-tech gear will prove it. But as the house begins to reveal itself to them, proof of an afterlife might not be everything Matt dreamed of. A story told in broken pieces in tapes, journals, and correspondence. This is the story of episode 13 and how everything went horribly, terribly wrong. Now, if that doesn't pull you in, I cannot wait to get to this book. The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo is actually a book I pre-ordered. I just love the aesthetic of it with its dark cover and black sprayed pages. The only requirements for this book were to have the same number of words in the title. It has 3.7 stars and over 91,000 ratings on Goodreads, which is such an odd number of reviews if you ask me. I don't know what it is. I find it a bit unsettling. The description reads, in a shabby house on a shabby street in the new capital of Madrid, Luisa Cotado uses scraps of magic to get through her days of endless toil as a scullion. But when her scheming mistress discovers the lump of a servant cowering in the kitchen is hiding a talent for little miracles, she demands Luisa use those gifts to better the family's social position. What begins as simple amusement for the bored nobility takes a perilous turn when Luisa garners the notice of Antonio Perez, the disgraced secretary to Spain's king. Still reeling from the defeat of his armada, the king is desperate for any advantage in the war against England's heretic queen, and Perez will stop at nothing to regain the king's favor. Determined to seize this one chance to better her fortune, Luisa plunges into a world of seers and alchemists, holy men and hucksters, where the line between magic, science, and fraud is never certain, but as her notoriety grows, so does the danger that her Jewish blood will doom her to the Inquisition's wrath. She will have to use every bit of her wit and will to survive, even if it means enlisting the help of Julian Santiago, an embittered immortal familiar whose own secrets could prove deadly for them both. It's listed under historical fantasy and magical realism, so I'm definitely interested to see where this story takes us. Six of Crows was one of Leigh Bardugo's big hits. It has 4.4 stars and a whopping 1 million ratings on Goodreads. I can only hope that when I write my book, it hits those kind of numbers. The next book in the challenge is a book by the same author as the previous one, so I figured it was a perfect chance to finally crack into this. I've read where people don't think the second book is necessary, so I don't really have an issue missing out on the sequel this read through. Contrary to the familiar, Six of Crows is a queer high fantasy young adult novel. The description is Ketterdam, a bustling city of international trade where anything can be had for the right price. And no one knows that better than criminal prodigy Kaz Brecker. Kaz is offered a chance at a deadly heist that could make him rich beyond his wildest dreams, but he can't pull it off alone. A convict with a thirst for revenge, a sharpshooter who can't walk away from a wager, a runaway with a privileged past, a spy known as the Wraith, a heartrender using her magic to survive the slums, a thief with a gift for unlikely escapes, 6 outcasts, one impossible heist. Kaz's crew's the only thing that might stand between the world and destruction, if they don't kill each other first. This definitely seems like it's going to be a fun read. I bought A Studying in Drowning fairly recently. I got the special edition with the nice edges. This is another book where I left out the article in favor of the rest of the title. I needed a book title that started with the same letter as the previous one. I had my eye on this book for ages and was more than ecstatic when it came in. I'm actually looking to pre-order the second book, A Theory of Dreaming, that comes out in August. And I just knew that I had to squeeze this in my TBR at some point this year, so I was really glad that I could find a place in the challenge for it. Currently, A Study in Drowning sits at 3.7 stars and over 71,000 reviews on Goodreads. It's another gothic novel, and another I would categorize as dark academia. In it, we follow Effie Sayer. She's always believed in fairy tales, haunted by visions of the Fairy King since childhood. She's had no choice. Her tattered copy of En Grade, Emerus Bearden's epic about a mortal girl who falls in love with the Fairy King, then destroys him, is the only thing that keeps her afloat. So when Mirrodin's family announces a contest to redesign the late author's estate, Effie feels certain it's her destiny. But musty, decrepit Hiraeth Manor is an impossible task, and its residents are far from welcoming, including Preston Hallory, a stodgy, young, illiterate scholar determined to expose Mirrodin as a fraud. As the two rivals piece together clues about Mirrodin's legacy, dark forces, both mortal and magical, conspire against them, and the truth may bring them both to ruin. This is honestly one of the books I'm looking forward to reading most this year. In a surprising turn of events, it was actually rather difficult to find a book that fit the next tag in the previous book challenge. An author from the same country as the previous one. Finding an American author should be easy, but all the books I kept looking at to fill this spot were authors from Canada, the UK, and Europe. Finally, I landed on The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. This was a book I bought on a whim on a day I was feeling down, because I have a problem with shopping therapy when I feel bad. But considering it's a historical mystery thriller, I'm very excited to read it. I love mysteries and detective stories. This one in particular is about a woman apothecary who gives poisons to women to get rid of the men who wronged them, and a historian looking into the murders 200 years later. That's such an interesting premise, and I really think it's going to be fun. As of posting this, I don't actually own Immortal Dark, but I fully intend to get my hands on it one way or the other before I get close to needing it. I have had my eyes on this book for a while. I figured a challenge was a perfect excuse to buy it. Eventually. For the next part of the previous book challenge, I needed one with the same star rating. Both Immortal Dark and The Lost Apothecary have 4.3 stars on Amazon and 3.7 stars on Goodreads. I think it's so funny both their scores line up like that. Immortal Dark is described as the cruel prince meets ninth house in this dangerously romantic dark academia fantasy, where a lost heiress must infiltrate an arcane society and live with the vampire she suspected killed her family and kidnapped her sister. The description says, "It began long before my time, but something has always hunted our family. Orphaned heiress Keaton Adane... Adane? I don't know if this is Adane or Adane. Correct me one way or the other, I guess. Grew up far from the arcane society she was born into, where human bloodlines gain power through vampire companionship. When her sister June disappears, Keaton is convinced a vampire stole her, the very vampire bound to their family, the cruel yet captivating Susenyos Sagad. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Find June, Keaton must infiltrate the elite Uxley University, where students study to ensure peaceful coexistence between humans and vampires and inherit their family legacies. Keaton must survive living with Susenyos, even when he does everything he can to drive her away. It doesn't matter that Susenyos' wickedness speaks to Keaton's own violent nature and tempts her to surrender to a life of darkness. She must find her sister and kill Susenyos at all cost. When a murder mirroring June's disappearance shakes Uxley, Keaton sinks further into the ruthless world of vampires, risking her very soul. Then she discovers a centuries-old threat, and June could be at the very center of it. To save her sister, Keaton must bring Uxley to its knees and either break free from the horrors of her own actions or embrace the dark entanglements of love and the blood it requires. I am literally so excited to finally get my hands on this and give it a read when the time comes. A Dark and Drowning Tide is another book I waited ages to get my hands on. It's another queer dark academia novel, which seems to be a theme this year, and fits perfectly with the next requirement, a book with a similar title as the previous one, whether in meaning or in words. Considering they're both dark academia and have dark in the title, it's perfect. It currently has 3.6 stars and 8,000 ratings on Goodreads. In A Dark and Drowning Tide, a sharp-tongued folklorist must pair up with her academic rival to solve their mentor's murder. What's not to love? I'm really hoping this enemies to lovers actually feels like an enemies to lovers. I want to feel their hatred and malice. I suppose the only way to know is to read. So, I'm not going to lie. The next handful I did cheat with. A few years ago, I bought a box set of the first 3 Witcher books, Blood of Elves, Time of Contempt, and Baptism by Fire. I almost finished Blood of Elves once, but never did. And I've played a bit of the Witcher games. I absolutely love this world and its characters. So I've finagled them to fit within the rules of the challenge. A book in a similar setting as the previous book. Both The Dark and Drowning Tide and the Witcher series are set in high fantasy worlds. After that, a book with the same color on the front page. I didn't know if this meant cover or like the inside front page. Either way, Time of Contempt has similar cover colors and the front page is white. And lastly, a book that costs the same to buy as the previous book. This is where I really stretch the meaning. Since the 3 came in a box set, technically it costs the same to buy it. So yes, I did bend the rules a little, but I'm still technically following the challenge. Tender as the Flesh is the final book of my challenge, which satisfies the author from a different country requirement. The Witcher books were written by Andrzej Sapkowski, a Polish author, while Tender as the Flesh was written by Augustina Basterka, an Argentinian author. I probably butchered both of those names, and I am so sorry. Tender as the Flesh is a book that I've heard about a lot and finally decided to cave in and buy. It has 3.7 stars and over 200,000 ratings on Goodreads. It's an incredibly interesting description. Working at the local processing plant, Marcos is in the business of slaughtering humans, though no one calls them that anymore. His wife left him, his father is sinking into dementia, and Marcos tries not to think too hard about how he makes a living. After all, it happened so quickly. Firstly, it was reported that an infectious virus made all animal meat poisonous to humans. Then governments initiated the transition. Now eating human meat, special meat, is legal. Marcos tries to stick to numbers, consignments, processing. Then one day he's given a live specimen of the finest quality. Though he's aware that any form of personal contact is forbidden on pain of death. Little by little, he starts to treat her like a human being, and soon he becomes tormented by what has been lost and what might still be saved. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the movie Fresh with Sebastian Stan. I loved that movie, so I'm really looking forward to reading it. I kid you not, I thought about Fresh for a solid 2 weeks after I watched it. It just, stuck with me. I don't really know why. With the challenge done, I ended up just choosing some books that have been on my TBR for a while, or sequels that I want to read this year. Most of them are horror books, of course, but it is my favorite genre, and always seems to have something new up its sleeve. There are a few different ones mixed in, though. A Botanist's Guide to Rituals and Revenge is the 4th installment in detective series I've been following. It comes out later this year, and I pre-ordered it in hopes of getting my hands on it sooner. I read the first 3 books in this series last year. In fact, the first book, A Botanist's Guide to Parties and Poisons, was what got me back into reading. I talked about it in my 2024 wrap-up over on my blog, so I will drop that linked below if you want to read about it. Last year, my friend's wife loaned me her copy of House in the Cerulean Sea, another book I talked about in my blog wrap-up. I didn't expect to love it so much, but I immediately purchased my own copy and pre-ordered the sequel, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. I cannot wait to read it. The first one was so heartwarming and such a palate cleanser from my usual haunts. I really hope that it lives up to my expectations from the first one. My Vampire Plus One is a companion novel to a book I read last year. My roommate is a vampire. This storyline was hinted at the end of the novel, so I'm excited to hop back into the world. The first one was a monster rom-com, and I enjoyed it immensely, so I'm curious how this will expand the world and if we'll get a cheeky update of the characters from the first story. I bought Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay and Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose around the same time. They're both pretty well-known horror authors. I thought it was just too funny that they both ended up with videotapes on the front cover. Horror Movie is set in June 1993, where a group of young guerrilla filmmakers spent 4 weeks making Horror Movie, a notorious, disturbing art house horror flick. The weird part? Only 3 of the film scenes were ever released to the public, but Horror Movie was nevertheless grown a rapid fan base. 3 decades later, Hollywood is pushing for a big budget reboot. The man who played the Thing Kid is the only surviving cast member. He remembers all too well the secrets buried within the original screenplay, the bizarre events of filming, and the dangerous cross lines on the set that resulted in tragedy. As memories flood back in, the boundaries between reality and film, past and present, start to blur. But he's going to help remake the film, even if it means navigating a world of cynical producers, egomaniacal directors, and surreal fan conventions. Demons of the past be damned, but at what cost? It sounds like it's going to be a fun read, and Paul Tremblay is a hugely popular horror writer. I don't think I've ever read a novel from him, only a short story called In Bloom in the Creature Feature short story collection on Amazon. It wasn't bad, so. Home is Where the Bodies Are follow 3 estranged siblings reunited to sort out their mother's estate. Beth, the oldest, never left home. She stayed with her mom, caring for her until the very end. Nicole, the middle child, has been kept at arm's length due to her ongoing battle with serious drug addiction. Michael, the youngest, lives at his estate and hasn't been back to their small Wisconsin town since their father ran out on them 7 years before. While going through their parents' belongings, the siblings stumble upon a collection of home videos and decide to revisit their happier memories. However, the nostalgia is cut short when one of the VHS tapes reveals a night back in 1999 that none of them have any recollection of. On the screen, their father appears covered in blood. What follows is a dead body and a pact between their parents to get rid of it, before the video abruptly ends. Beth, Nicole, and Michael must now decide whether to leave the past in the past or uncover the dark secret their mother took to her grave. That honestly sounds like it'd be a really good movie. A Tempest of Tea is one of those books I've been looking at since its release. I was so excited to get my hands on it, but again, never actually got around to reading it. It's about Arthi Casimir, a criminal mastermind and collector of secrets. Her prestigious tea room transforms into an illegal bloodhouse by dark, catering to the vampires feared by society. But when her establishment is threatened, Arthi is forced to strike an unlikely deal with an alluring adversary to save it. And she can't do the job alone. Calling on some of the city's most skilled outcasts, Arthi hatches a plan to infiltrate the sinister, glittering vampire society known as Ethereum. But not everyone in her ragtag crew is on her side, and as the truth behind the heist unfolds, Arthi finds herself in the midst of a conspiracy that will threaten the world as she knows it. Think either this year or next year the sequel to this one is actually supposed to come out. Graveyard Shift is a novella I picked up on my bachelorette trip. It's a little book of horror, and I can't wait to see what scares it can deliver. It's also kind of dark academia. The description says, every night in the college's ancient cemetery, 5 people cross paths as they work the late shift. A bartender, a rideshare driver, a hotel receptionist, the steward of the derelict church that looms over them, and the editor-in-chief of the college paper, always in search of a story. One dark October evening in the defunct churchyard, they find a hole that wasn't there before, a fresh open grave where no grave should be, but who dug it and for whom? Before they go their separate ways, the gravedigger returns. As they trail him through the night, they realize he may be the key to a string of strange happenings around the town that have made headlines for the last few weeks, and that they may be closer to the mystery than they thought. I don't know about you, but that sounds exciting and promising. The last couple of books on this year's TBR are Grady Hendrix novels I haven't gotten around to reading, but have been dying to. The Southern Book Club's Guide to Hunting Vampires, and We Sold Our Souls, and The Final Girl Support Group, both of which I started and never finished. Like I said earlier, I'm a huge Grady Hendrix fan, so I can't wait to get to them. There is my 25 in 2025. I have no idea how long we've been going here, but I hope you enjoyed. I'll leave links to everything down in the description below in case you want to get any of the books for yourselves. And in case you want to check out my blog and any of the posts I've written there. 25 books in 1 year is such a huge goal, but I'm more than up for it. I'm so excited to challenge myself and see if I can actually get through my TBR. Let me know if there's anything you're looking forward to reading this year. Are you doing a 25 in 2025? Let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, I have been Whisper. Please come back to visit the library again soon.